First time Eleanor Price bled on Texas soil, she did not cry. She pressed her thumb against the split in her palm and watched the blood drip into the dry prairie dirt. The wind moved through the grass like it had somewhere better to be. The sky stretched wide and empty above her. No house, no husband, no welcome. Only broken boards scattered across the abandoned Holbrook homestead, and a letter folded in her pocket that had already ruined her life once. Found myself a local girl. Don't come, Marcus. 7 words. That was all it took to turn 1,500 miles of hope into nothing. Eleanor had arrived in Texas with a carpet bag, 3 nights paid at Mrs. Olson's boarding house, and $347 sewn into the lining of her corset. She had arrived expecting a husband named Marcus Holloway. Instead, she found a platform, a stage driver who would not meet her eyes, and a town already whispering. So she walked. The old Holbrook place sat empty for 2 years, roof sagging, 3 walls still standing, fever having taken the family in one terrible week. Nobody wanted it. Nobody claimed it. The lumber lay gray and scattered like bones in tall grass. Eleanor claimed it. She pried boards loose with the steel stay from her corset. She stacked the ones that still had strength left in them. She measured angles the way she remembered her father doing when he built their barn back in Illinois. She set posts into shallow ground with hands that were not meant for ranch work, but did it anyway. When the rusted nail split her palm, she wrapped it with a strip torn from her petticoat and kept building. The crossbeam was wrong. She knew it even as she raised it. The green wood bowed under its own weight. "That beam's going to fall on you." The voice came calm, steady. Eleanor did not turn right away. Her hand found the Winchester, leaning against the cottonwood tree. She had heard the horse 10 minutes earlier. She had made sure the rifle was visible. "Then I'll build another," she said. The man dismounted slow, tall, weathered, maybe mid-30s. His wagon held straight pine boards, fresh cut and smooth. "That greenwood won't last the week," he said. "Week's all I need." "No, ma'am, it ain't." He stepped forward, not close enough to threaten, just close enough to study the frame. He set the brace at an angle and showed her with his hands how the weight should fall downward, not sideways. Eleanor watched once. Then she mirrored the motion on the opposite corner. He nodded and handed her a proper hammer. Solid weight. Balanced. She drove the nail in 2 clean strikes. They worked without much talking as the sun lowered. He cut boards. She positioned them. When she suggested a steeper roof angle for rain runoff, he adjusted without complaint. When he showed her how to overlap boards to block wind, she followed without pride getting in the way. By dusk, the frame stood square and steady. "Caleb Turner," he said, loading his tools. "Eleanor Price. I'll bring more lumber tomorrow. I don't take charity. Not offering any, just don't like bad construction." He left jerky and real coffee in a canvas bag without looking back. That night, Eleanor sat beneath the cottonwood with her Winchester across her knees. The shelter was not finished. It would not keep real rain out yet. But it was hers, built with her blood, built with her hands. At dawn, Caleb Turner returned. He counted mistakes in silence. He saw the crack forming in the crossbeam. He saw the bandage on her hand. "This will kill you by noon," he said plainly. "Then I'll die with walls around me." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he lifted the beam clear of the supports with his shoulders and told her to pull the braces free. They rebuilt it properly. Solid pine, proper angles. No bow. By midday, sweat soaked through her dress. Her palm bled fresh through the cloth. Neither of them stopped. He showed her how to measure corners using 3, 4, 5. She learned fast. He noticed. They shared water from the same jug. Salt pork, dried apples from Illinois. "Why here?" he asked. "Because I was told to come." He knew the name Marcus Holloway without her saying it. By evening, the shelter had a temporary canvas roof. It would hold for now. "Ranch is 6 miles north," Caleb said. "If you need work." "I need no one's pity." "Good," he replied. "I wasn't offering that either." The next morning he returned with biscuits and a job, $20 a month, cooking for 8 men, keeping the ranch books. Quarters with a lock on the inside. Eleanor studied his messy ledger. Within minutes, she saw the truth. "You're losing money," she said. "Someone's stealing." Caleb's jaw tightened. She listed dates, amounts, percentages. She spoke numbers like weapons. "You're certain?" "Numbers don't lie." That was how she came to the Turner Ranch. Not as charity, not as a rescued bride, but as Mrs. Price, cook and bookkeeper. The first night she fed 8 men beef stew and biscuits that tasted like dignity. They washed before eating because she told them to. They thanked her after. But storms do not wait for new beginnings to settle. Thunder rolled across the prairie 3 nights later. The wind tore at the garden she had started. She ran into rain and hail to save tomato plants with bleeding hands, while Caleb drove stakes deep into mud. Inside the kitchen later, glass shards cut her palms as the window shattered under hail. She did not cry then either. James, one of the ranch hands, disappeared into the storm and returned hours later at the gate with stolen money in his pocket and shame on his face. Caleb would have run him off. Eleanor did not. "Work it back," she said. "Men who measure their wrongs still have conscience." James stayed. Then came Jack Randall, drunk, angry, armed, claiming what he said was his. Eleanor stepped into the rain with bandaged hands and faced him without shaking. She quoted numbers he could not deny. She offered him a choice. Leave and keep his freedom, or stay and face prison. He left. When the rain stopped and the night cleared, Caleb placed partnership papers in her hands, 40% of the ranch. "Stay," he said. She looked out at the shelter by the creek, still standing despite the storm. "Yes," she answered. By sunrise, Marcus Holloway had filed a lawsuit in town. By mid-morning, Caleb had pulled his mother's wedding band from his pocket. "We're already building together," he said. "Might as well do it proper." Eleanor slid the ring on beside Sarah Moss's kitchen ring. The abandoned bride who arrived with 7 cruel words in her pocket stood on Texas soil with a partner at her side and 8 men ready to witness a wedding before church bells rang. Broken boards, bleeding hands, a storm that tried to tear everything apart, and a woman who chose not to quit when quitting would have been easier. Some shelters are built from lumber, others are built from staying. This one was built from both. The wedding did not wait for church bells. It happened in the Turner kitchen, with rainwater still dripping from the roof and broken glass swept into a bucket by the stove. Miguel Santos stood straight as a fence post. Tommy tried not to grin too wide. James held his hat in both hands like it was something sacred. Caleb Turner slipped his mother's plain gold band onto Eleanor's finger. Eleanor kept Sarah Moss's signet ring on her right hand. No flowers, no lace, no promises dressed in poetry. Just 2 people who had already bled for the same ground. By noon, they were husband and wife. By sunset, the storm damage began to show its cost. The garden was half destroyed. Bean poles snapped, squash vines flattened, shingles torn from the roof. One window boarded up with pine. The shelter by the creek still stood, but the canvas roof had ripped on one side. Eleanor walked through the damage without flinching. She had learned something on that platform in town when Marcus's letter burned in her pocket. Loss does not ask permission. It simply arrives. The question is always the same. What do you rebuild first? She chose the books. While the men climbed ladders and hammered shingles back into place, Eleanor spread the ranch ledgers across the kitchen table. Rain had nearly soaked one corner. Ink bled in thin blue lines. She dried the pages by the stove and began cross-checking figures against the store copies she had brought back from town. James stood near the doorway. "You don't trust me," he said quietly. "I trust you to work," she replied, without looking up. Trust grows after. He nodded once and went back outside. By evening, she found the pattern. The theft had not stopped with Jack Randall. It had shifted. Small amounts, always small enough to hide. Charged in tobacco, in ammunition, in feed that never reached the barn. Signed with a hand trying to mimic Jack's curves, but failing. The R in Turner curved right, not left. The ink was different. The dates fell on Sundays. "Who was in town Sundays?" she asked Caleb that night. "Only one man goes regular," he said. "Henderson, the banker. He's got reason to skim." Eleanor closed the ledger slow. "He's not just gossiping," she said. "He's feeding information and taking money in between." The next morning, the judge's summons sat heavy on the kitchen counter. Marcus Holloway versus Eleanor Price. Breach of contract. Seeking damages for emotional distress and travel costs. Tommy read it twice, his eyebrows climbing higher each time. "Emotional distress?" he said. "From leaving her standing on a platform?" Miguel shook his head slow. "Some men cry loudest when they are..." Who cut? Caleb stood by the window, watching dust rise on the far road. "They want to embarrass you," he said. "Make you small again." Eleanor folded the summons neatly and slid it into her ledger. "They already tried that," she answered. "Didn't work." Monday morning came hot and dry. The storm had washed the sky clear. The courthouse sat in the center of town like a square brick warning. People gathered early. News traveled fast in Texas. The abandoned bride. The sudden partnership. The drunken foreman run off in the rain. The ranch cook who handled books like a banker. Marcus stood near the courthouse steps in a borrowed suit that did not fit him well. Amy Holloway stood 2 paces behind, eyes lowered. Mrs. Henderson hovered like a hawk near the doorway. Caleb walked beside Eleanor, but did not touch her. He did not need to. Inside, the judge called the room to order. Marcus spoke first. He claimed travel costs. He claimed humiliation. He claimed that Eleanor had misrepresented herself. "She came under false pretenses," he said. "Did not disclose that she was previously married. I was misled." A murmur moved through the room. Eleanor stood. "My husband, Thomas Price, died of typhoid 3 years ago," she said steady. "I answered an advertisement for marriage. Mr. Holloway wrote me 7 letters promising partnership, property, and good faith. He married another woman before I arrived and sent no warning." The judge leaned back. "Mr. Holloway," he said, "did you inform Miss Price that you had changed your intentions?" Marcus swallowed. "I wrote her." "On what date?" Marcus hesitated. The judge turned to Eleanor. "Do you have the correspondence?" She opened her ledger and pulled out each letter, neatly folded, kept as evidence rather than memory. She placed them in the judge's hands. Dates, promises, specifics, no cancellation. Only the final cruel note sent after the wedding. The courtroom shifted. "And the travel expenses?" the judge asked. "I paid my own ticket," Eleanor said. "I have the receipt." She slid it forward. Marcus's face went red. The judge dismissed the claim within minutes. "Case closed," he said. "Costs to be paid by Mr. Holloway." Outside, the town gathered closer. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward first. "Well," she said, voice thin, "that was fortunate." "Truth often is," Eleanor replied. But the mourning was not finished. Caleb stepped forward in the same courtyard. "I have a matter for the court as well," he said. He handed over store ledgers and bank copies, signed charges, missing deposits, Sunday transactions. The judge studied them long. "Mr. Henderson will be questioned," he said finally. The banker's face drained of color. By afternoon, word spread. The ranch was no longer a place of whispered scandal. It was a place of exposed truth. That evening, as the sun lowered red across the prairie, Eleanor stood in the garden with Caleb. Half the plants were gone. Half still stood. James worked quietly repairing bean poles without being told. Miguel counted cattle near the fence. Tommy practiced hammer swings on scrap wood. "We'll lose some," Caleb said. "We'll save more," Eleanor answered. He studied her face in the fading light. "You don't scare easy." "I was scared on that platform," she said. "I just decided fear wasn't useful." A rider appeared on the horizon, not drunk, not weaving, purposeful. Caleb's jaw tightened. Jack Randall had not ridden toward San Antonio. He had ridden east, and now he was coming back. Eleanor felt the wind shift. Storms never come alone in Texas. Sometimes they return stronger. She turned toward the house, toward the shotgun behind the door. "Looks like," she said calmly, "we're not finished building yet." Jack Randall did not ride in shouting this time. He rode in slow, sober. That alone made him more dangerous. Dust followed his horse in a thin cloud as he crossed the Turner Gate without waiting for permission. The men in the yard went still. Miguel's hand drifted near his belt. Tommy stopped mid-swing with the hammer. James froze by the bean poles. Eleanor stepped out of the kitchen before Caleb could tell her to stay inside. This time she did not carry the shotgun. She carried the ledger. Jack dismounted and removed his hat. His face looked thinner. The anger had not left him, but it had settled into something colder. "You lied to me," he said to Eleanor. "I negotiated with facts," she replied. "You made me look like a fool. You did that yourself." The wind moved between them. No thunder, no storm clouds, just heat and open sky. Jack's jaw worked. "Henderson's in trouble," he said. "Judge is asking questions. Folks think I fed him numbers. I didn't." "You fed him gossip," Eleanor said evenly. "He fed you whiskey." Jack glanced toward Caleb. "You giving her full run of the place now?" "She earned it," Caleb answered. Jack looked at the ranch house, the repaired roof, the rebuilt fence, the men working without shouting, the garden half restored already, tomato plants standing stronger than before. "You think this place holds because of her books?" he asked. "No," Caleb said. "It holds because she stays." Silence stretched. Then Jack reached into his saddlebag. Every man on the ranch stiffened. He pulled out papers. Not a pistol. "Bill of sale," he said, tossing them toward Caleb. "Those cattle from Fort Worth. I was going to sell more. Thought I deserved it. Caleb picked up the papers, but did not unfold them. Why bring them back? Jack swallowed hard. Because if Henderson falls, he drags me with him, and because I don't want prison. That's fear, Eleanor said. Jack looked at her. Call it what you want. She stepped closer. Fear can build, she said, or it can rot. He stared at her like he wanted to argue, but he did not. I'm leaving, Jack said finally. For good this time. Caleb studied him long. You won't find work around here, he said. I ain't planning to, Jack replied. He mounted again, not drunk, not wild, just tired. Before riding off, he looked at Eleanor one last time. You don't belong out here, he said. Eleanor met his eyes steady. I built out here, she answered. That's belonging enough. Jack rode away without another word. The dust settled slower this time. The men returned to work. Life did not pause to celebrate small victories. Inside the kitchen that evening, Eleanor sat at the table with the partnership papers spread before her. The judge had signed them official that afternoon. 40% in her name, 10% in Miguel's, 50 in Caleb's. James stood near the doorway. I wrote to my daughter, he said quietly. Told her I'm staying. Told her I'm earning back what I owe. Eleanor nodded. That's building, she said. He nodded back and left. Caleb closed the door behind him and leaned against it. You ever think about how close you came to sleeping under that canvas through winter? He asked. She smiled faint. I would have managed. He crossed the room. You shouldn't have had to. Eleanor stood and walked to the window. The shelter by the creek still stood in the fading light. Not needed anymore, but not forgotten either. I'm glad I did, she said softly, because it taught me something. What's that? That nobody rides over unless you're already swinging the hammer. Caleb laughed once under his breath. He moved closer, resting his hands on the table beside her. You changed this place, he said. No, she corrected gently. We changed it. Outside, Miguel's voice carried across the yard, calling men to supper. Tommy chased a stray chicken near the smokehouse. James hammered the last brace into place on the fence. The ranch did not look grand. It looked worked. It looked lived in. It looked like something built to last. That Sunday evening, they stood together at the edge of the garden. Half the plants were new stakes. Half were survivors from the storm. The tomato plant she had saved with bleeding hands leaned slightly, but fruit hung from its branches. Caleb touched one gently. Stubborn thing, he said. Eleanor nodded. It had help. He slipped his arm around her waist, not to steady her, but because it felt right. Town's already talking, he said. Let them. You sure you're ready for that? I was ready the day I stepped off that stage and didn't turn back. The sky burned orange and gold. Texas sunsets did not apologize for their size. Miguel called from the porch. Supper's ready, partners. Partners. The word felt solid. Eleanor looked once more at the creek where broken boards had become shelter. At the ranch house where ledgers and biscuits and courage had become family. At the men who now worked not just for wages, but for something steadier. She had arrived in Texas abandoned. She now stood landowner. Wife. Bookkeeper. Builder. Not because someone rescued her, but because she chose to build when quitting would have been easier. Caleb squeezed her hand gently, careful of the scars that would never fully fade. Ready? He asked. Eleanor smiled, small but certain. I've been ready since the first nail. They walked back toward the house together as the light faded. Broken boards, bleeding hands, a storm that tried to tear everything apart, and a woman who decided that staying